Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Alhamdulillahi tusabbihu bihamdihi al-ard wa man alayha was-samaa wa ma fiha. Nahmaduhu wa nasta'inuhu wa nastaghfiruhu wa nastahdihi. Wa nu'minu bihi wa natawakkalu alayhi. Wa na'udhu billahi min shururi anfusina wa min sayyiati a'malina. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد النبي الأمي وعلى آله وصحبه وبارك وسلم. Let me begin today by asking Allah that He gives us a reprieve from the affliction that the humanity is facing today. That He deals with us with mercy. Mercy that dominates over everything. That He makes it a turning point from the corruption, oppression, dhulm, ghafla that surrounds us in the world. And that He gives us and the humanity realization that all powers belong to Him, that we are utterly dependent on Him, and that we are going to return to Him. Today I want to take up the topic of Istighfar and its centrality in the development of self and development of society. In a famous hadith, Prophet ﷺ said, وَالَّذِي نَفْسِي بِيَدِهِ لَوْ لَمْ تُذْنِبُوا لَذَهَبَ اللَّهُ بِكُمْ وَلَجَاءَ بِقَوْمٍ يُذْنِبُونَ فَيَسْتَغْفِرُونَ اللَّهَ فَيَغْفِرَ لَهُمْ. That he said, by Him in whose hands is my life, if you are not to commit sins, then Allah will remove you and will bring some other people who will seek forgiveness so that Allah can forgive them. This hadith is not a license to commit sin or to recognize that that's how our life and our world is. But its purpose is to make us understand the nature of our creation. Nature of our creation that is necessitated by the burden of us having a free will out of all the other creation in the world. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّا عَرَضْنَا الْأَمَانَةَ عَلَى السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَالْجِبَالِ فَأَبَيْنَ أَنْ يَحْمِلْنَهَا وَأَشْفَقْنَ مِنْهَا وَحَمَلَهَا الْإِنسَانُ إِنَّهُ كَانَ ظَلُومًا جَهُولًا. That we tried to present and give this trust to the heavens and the earth and the mountains, but they refused to bear it. And they were fearful of it. But man took this burden, and he is indeed very ignorant, and he does wrong to himself. And so this describes that by virtue of being given this free will, it necessitates that we have the capacity to do wrong. We have the capacity to commit sins. And if we have the capacity to do something, then we are bound to fall into it. regardless of how much we try to keep ourselves straight. This is where Prophet ﷺ once said that the relationship of sin with this world is like a person walking on water. It is not possible to remain dry in when someone is walking on water. So that is how our life is and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes our life. And success is not described by the fact that there is only that you will be perfect. But success is described in the akhirah, those who will be muqarrabeen, those who will receive the highest success and status in akhirah, about whom them the first quality that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, that they will receive his forgiveness. And so forgiveness is associated with success. Forgiveness is associated with Allah raising our status before him. And now istighfar is a process that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes in Quran. Istighfar is a process that occurs in the Sunnah, in Hadith, in narrations. Our history is filled with it. The du'as and azkar all deal with this concept of istighfar. But today I want to discuss in a more depth what really this istighfar means. Oftentimes, istighfar is taken to mean as a particular dua or a particular statement that a person makes or a particular ritual that a person goes through in order to seek forgiveness from Allah. But if you reflect on the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes this istighfar in Quran, istighfar is not ta'awuz, not seeking protection. Istighfar is not tawbah itself, that is the process of returning from your old ways and going on to your correct ways. But istighfar is a process through which societies mend themselves, people make themselves better persons in the world, people recognize what their mistakes were, and they turn around and correct themselves. So sometimes the dawah and the call of all the messengers is summarized in just one statement. وَيَا قَوْمِ اسْتَغْفِرُوا رَبَّكُمْ. O people, seek forgiveness from your Lord. And so this one statement describes the basic dawah, the most fundamental call that the messengers made to the people to whom they were sent. And so it's not just some words to be uttered periodically, but it must be a process that must be implemented. A process that is not linked with the proportionality of your sins, that the more the sinner you are, the higher the istighfar, but it's a process that must occur regardless in our lives. And it's a process very much part of our achieving success, both here in this world and the next world. Prophet ﷺ said, Ya ayyuhan nasu tubu ilallah, fa inni atubu fil yawmi ilayhi mi'atu marra. That, O people, turn to Allah, because I turn to him every day 100 times. Someone who was ma'soom, someone whose all sins were forgiven, someone who was safeguarded from doing error, he says that I turn to Allah 100 times a day. And so it's not really connected with sin itself. And we have a saying which is as a cliche, I'm a sinner, I'm not a very good person, I have a lot of sins that I've accumulated in my life. When we say these things in a societal context, we don't really mean to reflect on what is really wrong with us. Because istighfar is a process of constant renewal and of the idea of our accountability before Allah. Prophet ﷺ also said, "Innahu la yughanu ala qalbi, wa inni la astaghfirullah fil yawmi mi'atu marra." That there are times when my heart is covered with unmindfulness or a veil, and I seek forgiveness from Allah over 100 times a day. That is what Prophet ﷺ is teaching us. The Prophet ﷺ, whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala presents before us as the model that we must follow. His whole life is a model for us that we must make our lives like what the Prophet ﷺ's life was like. And his process, daily process, from the morning that he will wake up until he is going to go to sleep, involved repeatedly, constantly seeking forgiveness from Allah. Seeking forgiveness in the sense, so I think also when we translate this word purely into seeking forgiveness, I think it fails to convey the full depth of what is required when we say astaghfirullah. What does it mean when we say astaghfirullah? It is also described as the characteristic of those who will be entered into paradise. وَالَّذِينَ إِذَا فَعَلُوا فَاحِشَةً أَوْ ظَلَمُوا أَنفُسَهُمْ ذَكَرُوا اللَّهَ فَاسْتَغْفَرُوا لِذُنُوبِهِمْ وَمَنْ يَغْفِرُ الذُّنُوبَ إِلَّا اللَّهُ وَلَمْ يُصِرُّوا عَلَى مَا فَعَلُوا وَهُمْ يَعْلَمُونَ. That those who sometimes commit indecent things or do wrong to themselves, they immediately remember Allah. And then they seek forgiveness for their sins. And who is there to forgive their sins except Allah? And they do not insist, وَلَمْ يُصِرُّوا عَلَى مَا فَعَلُوا, into what they were doing, knowingly insist on something. So this part of وَلَمْ يُصِرُّوا عَلَى مَا فَعَلُوا وَهُمْ يَعْلَمُونَ, this ilm, this knowledge, this recognition of what is wrong with you, this recognition of in what ways we need to improve ourselves, is what is part of the process of istighfar. And it's not just in terms of the religious Islamic teaching, but even in most secular perspective, in the most secular meaning of it, learning a behavior that leads to bettering yourself, accountability, putting before yourself measurable goals, and then putting your process of evaluation is important to run any endeavor in this world. Whether you are part of a business or an organization or any project or anything you want to do in this world, this process of evaluation must exist. And so this istighfar is also this process that must be constant, that must be continuously occurring in our lives. And it is to this point that Allah subhanahu and Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned in a very beautiful hadith, occurs in many books of Sahih Sitta, including Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, narrated by Abu Hurairah radiyallahu anhu, in which he describes that Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Fima yahki an Rabbihi azza wa jal," that in what Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was telling us about the Lord, the Great. قال أذنب عبد ذنبا فقال اللهم اغفر لي ذنبي. So he says that a servant committed a sin, and sin is any wrong that is harmful to you, that is prohibited from Allah, that is disliked by Allah. أذنب عبد ذنبا فقال اللهم اغفر لي ذنبي. So once he has committed this, he recognizes that he has done something wrong. فَقَالَ اللَّهُمَّ اغْفِرْ لِي ذَنْبِي. Then he says, "Oh Allah, forgive my sin." فَقَالَ تَبَارَكَ وَتَعَالَى. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَذْنَبَ عَبْدِي ذَنْبًا. My servant committed a sin. فَعَلِمَ أَنَّ لَهُ رَبًّا يَغْفِرُ الذَّنْبَ. and that he knows that he has a Lord who is capable of forgiving his sin, وَيَأْخُذُ بِالذَّنْبِ, and who is also capable of punishing him for his sin. ثُمَّ عَادَ, so after a while he gets back and again commits sin. ثُمَّ عَادَ فَأَذْنَبَ, and then he again commits the sin. فَقَالَ أَيْ رَبِّ اغْفِرْ لِي ذَنْبِي, so he says, oh my Lord, forgive my sin. فَقَالَ تَبَارَكَ وَتَعَالَى عَبْدِي أَذْنَبَ ذَنْبًا, so the Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, my servant committed his sin. فَعَلِمَ أَنَّ لَهُ رَبًّا يَغْفِرُ الذَّنْبَ, and he knows that his Lord can forgive his sins, and he can also punish him for his sin. ثُمَّ عَادَ, and then he returns, and again commits the sin. ثُمَّ عَادَ فَأَذْنَبَ فَقَالَ أَيْ رَبِّ اغْفِرْ لِي ذَنْبِي, then he says, oh Lord, forgive my sin. فَقَالَ تَبَارَكَ وَتَعَالَى أَذْنَبَ عَبْدِي ذَنْبًا فَعَلِمَ أَنَّ لَهُ رَبًّا يَغْفِرُ الذَّنْبَ, so then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says again that my servant did commit a sin, and he knows that his Lord can forgive him for it. وَيَأْخُذُ بِالذَّنْبِ, and he is able to take him into account, punish him for that sin. وَعَمَّلْ مَا شِئْتَ فَقَدْ غَفَرْتُ لَكَ, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, do whatever you want, I have forgiven you. And the narrator of the hadith says, لا أدري أقال في الثالثة أو الرابعة اعمل ما شئت, I do not know if it was the third time or the fourth time that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, اعمل ما شئت, do whatever you want. So what this hadith is again referring to is not that we take a license for it and we say that as long as we just seek forgiveness is fine, but it is referring to a continuous, constant process in our life that we can never be free of. We can never achieve a state in life in which we may think that we do not have to seek forgiveness, or that we may ever think that we have achieved a state in life that we are free of mistakes, that we are not going to be committing any more mistakes, that we have made ourselves better in ways in which we will not do wrong. Because that is part of human nature that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created us, in which He has associated shaitan with our lives, in which He has created the world surrounded by temptations, by delusions, by illusions that constantly pull us towards them. And so in that sense, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has described it, this says, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is describing that this is a process, and it's a process that must occur continuously and constantly. So istighfar is not just some words that you say from your mouth, that comes out of your tongue, but istighfar is a process in which you fully recognize what was wrong with you. So even in this hadith, it is referring to a particular sin. When it says, فَقَالَ تَبَارَكَ وَتَعَالَى أَذْنَبَ عَبْدِي ذَنْبًا. Zamban is singular. It's one sin, one mistake. So a generic istighfar where you just sit down and say, oh Allah, just forgive all my sins, is not an effective istighfar. An effective istighfar is when you sit down and you evaluate and you count what are the ways in which you have done wrong. What are the things that troubles you that you know is wrong, will not be liked by Allah, is detrimental to you for both in this life and the next life. And so the best, most effective istighfar is the one that is specific, that is particular, that you go through every day in life. Every day you face new situations and new circumstances. In those new situations and new circumstances, you are constantly learning and mending yourself and making yourself a better person. In that constant struggle to make yourself a better person, you must make istighfar. When you say astaghfirullah, you must recognize and you must remember what is it that you are seeking forgiveness from. You must count your sins. You must count your mistakes. You must recall what was done wrong and then seek Allah's forgiveness over it. A generic, oh Allah, just forgive all my sins, just forgive all my sins, is not very effective if istighfar. It's very generic and it's not very meaningful. A meaningful istighfar is when you actually count and recall what is it that is wrong with you and ask Allah's forgiveness for that particular wrong. So aznaba abdi zamban is counting a very singular sin, a very singular wrongdoing. And so that's also something that we must keep in mind, that the istighfar that is going to be effective is the one that is associated with a specific realization of what is wrong with us. And so istighfar is also has not just an individual context, but also a societal context. A societal context of turning the society around from its conduct that is destructive for the collective society as a whole. And we see those wrongs that goes on in our society constantly: usurpation of rights, oppression of weak, disbalance of distribution, seeking superiority and authority over others, going against the nature on which Allah has created us, whether it is the nature on which we human beings are created and how we are supposed to interact with each other, and the nature in which Allah has created and how we interact with the nature in which we find ourselves. So there is so much that even secular world recognizes what is wrong with the society. And so specifically when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions the prophets and their invitation and call to their people that they must seek istighfar, they must seek forgiveness, then it is discussed in a collective societal context. So it is said to Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that he would call his people and say, وَأَنِسْتَغْفِرُوا رَبَّكُمْ ثُمَّ تُوبُوا إِلَيْهِ, that you should seek forgiveness from your Lord and turn back to Allah. يُمَتِّعَكُمْ مَتَاعًا حَسَنًا إِلَىٰ أَجَلٍ مُسَمًّى. As a result of that, He will give you reprieve. He will give you time in this world, whatever time is written for you, and that time will be good. Mata'an hasanan ila ajali musamma. He will give you good in this life, so your society will be prosperous, will function better as a result of this process of istighfar, of making a correction to the wrongs that are in the society. In the same way, Prophet Hud said, وَيَا قَوْمِ اسْتَغْفِرُوا رَبَّكُمْ ثُمَّ تُوبُوا إِلَيْهِ يُرْسِلِ السَّمَاءَ عَلَيْكُمْ مِدْرَارًا وَيَزِدْكُمْ قُوَّةً إِلَىٰ قُوَّتِكُمْ وَلَا تَتَوَلَّوْا مُجْرِمِينَ. That, O my people, seek forgiveness from your Lord and turn to Him. As a result, He will send rain upon you from the heavens. And He will send you rain upon you that is constant and in abundance. وَيَزِدْكُمْ قُوَّةً إِلَىٰ قُوَّتِكُمْ, and He will increase you in whatever strength you have. And the process of not doing that istighfar is to say, وَلَا تَتَوَلَّوْا مُجْرِمِينَ, and don't become criminals as a result of not turning back from the wrong that you are doing. Prophet Nuh was also asked to say to his people, فَقُلْتُ اسْتَغْفِرُوا رَبَّكُمْ إِنَّهُ كَانَ غَفَّارًا. That I told them, seek forgiveness from your Lord. He is the one who can forgive you. يُرْسِلِ السَّمَاءَ عَلَيْكُمْ مِدْرَارًا وَيُمْدِدْكُمْ بِأَمْوَالٍ وَبَنِينَ وَيَجْعَلْ لَكُمْ جَنَّاتٍ وَيَجْعَلْ لَكُمْ أَنْهَارًا. So as a result, he will send you abundant rain from the heavens, and he will increase your wealth and your progeny, and he will create gardens for you, and he will make the rivers flow for you. And all these benefits in a societal context, in a collective context, are the benefits that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes about this world. And it is important that we pay attention to these as we are going through this crisis in the world, this affliction in the world, that to turn around our circumstances and situations in the world, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has linked it with societies making correction in whatever is wrong with them. Because nothing in this world is beyond purpose. And whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes us through in this world has a meaning, has a purpose. And we must recognize that meaning and that purpose whenever we face affliction, is always to wake us up, always to make us recognize what is wrong with us, always to make us make corrections in our life. And that making those corrections is actually what istighfar is all about. That is what when a call is made to do istighfar, then that is what a call is made from. Another thing that makes it clear in these verses is the fact that istighfar is not tawbah. Tawbah is very different and distinct and separate from istighfar. Istighfar is the process of evaluation and coming to recognize what is wrong and then trying to correct it. Tawbah is to turn back from your wrong, to make amend, to turn to Allah. So everywhere in these verses, it is said, Istaghfiru rabbakum summa tubu ilayhi. That the tawbah follows istighfar. Seek forgiveness and then turn to Allah. Now seek forgiveness, again, I just want you to keep in mind what I said so far from the beginning, is that seek forgiveness, not just some dua that you learn and then you utter from your tongues, but seek forgiveness is a process in which you evaluate and you remember and recall specific wrongs, and then you try to make amend and correct yourself considering those wrongs. So tawbah is what follows the istighfar. Tawbah is not istighfar itself. Tawbah is the process that after your recognition and realization as to what is wrong with you, you correct yourself and you make an intention that you are not going to allow that mistake, that wrong to persist. And so anytime you allow some mistake to persist, it's going to get worse and worse in your life for you. And that is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, lam yusirru ala ma fa'alu, they don't persist on what was wrong with them. And so this is how I understand the process of istighfar, is that the whole meaning of istighfar is not just some dua that you must say after every prayer, but you must use istighfar consciously, deliberately, trying to recognize what is it that is wrong, and then trying to make a correction in what is wrong with you. And as we are approaching in about 2 weeks, the month of Ramadan will start. The month of Ramadan is a month of self-reflection. Month of Ramadan is a month of tazkiyah, where we try to make ourselves better persons, better human beings. And we go through our whole life in a struggle with good and bad in our lives. And if you look at your life, a major source of unhappiness and sadness in our life is that despite knowing everything, despite knowing what is good for us and what is bad for us, we don't need to listen to any long speeches or khutbas or read books for that recognition. We all inherently know in very detail as to what is it that is wrong with me. and we are unable to overcome those shortcomings and those mistakes. And if you look at your life and in terms of our sadness and our unhappiness in life, a major source of that sadness and unhappiness is this realization of our errors, our shortcomings, our weaknesses, that we constantly fall into error. We constantly fail to hold our tongue where we must hold our tongue, constantly fail to close our ears from listening to what we must not listen to, constantly fail to avert our eyes from seeing what we must not look at. And we constantly fail and our weakness of not taking the step that we clearly know we must take for our success and for what is required of us in this life, in this world. And so to recognize all of those things and to go through a very rigorous process of istighfar during this month, istighfar of self-evaluation, which is what Prophet ﷺ described the whole purpose of fasting, that whoever fasted this month, evaluating himself, taking an account of himself, then he is the one whose all of his sins will be forgiven. All of his sins that he has done so far will be forgiven as long as he fasts. And he fasts where his whole fast is spent in this self-evaluation, in this recognition of what is wrong with us. And so we are at the doorsteps of Ramadan. I hope and pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keeps us alive until the month of Ramadan, that He gives us this opportunity to go through the blessings of the month and to be able to implement this process of istighfar, this process of self-evaluation in our lives, so that we may be successful both here in this world and the next world. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم.